Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's just 3:30 now, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome back. To assure that you're in the right space, we're talking about multi-tiered systems of support in early childhood settings. Today is our second session. We're going to be diving into resource mapping today. Today's agenda is posted here. We'll do our best to stay within these time frames. As some of you may know, we have a cohort on Monday, and although Andrea and I did much better staying on topic and within our planned time, we did run out for the last couple of slides. So we'll see what we can do around improvements for that today. So our objectives, by the end of this session, you'll be able to apply resource mapping strategies to the development of practice profiles for an MTSS implementation. So there's a challenge by choice there, similar to session 1. Not anything that you have to do, but certainly available for those who like to assure that they got what they were expecting and what we were hoping to provide from our training today. I did send through the email your companion guide, which is optional. It's there if you want it, both digitally and through PDF.
And in this session, we are going to continue to explore the 3 Ps. And if you remember from last week or 2 weeks ago, the 3 Ps were people, planning, and partnerships. And in this case, we're really looking at the people and the planning, right? The people and the planning are going to be like the primary focus of this particular session. The partnerships comes along later as you're once you've got your resource map built, and then you can use that to create, partnerships among the people and the resources that you have available. And so at the end of this, the idea is that you'll be able to explain, what the resource mapping process is. Who are the people in my neighborhood? We'll shout out to Mr. Rogers, meaning who are the people that are associated with my program that I need to include in my resource map, and how do I match the people that I have, which is one of your resources, to the other resources that are non-people, right? So like your curriculums, your data, your time, your those kinds of things like that. And so as you're looking through the work today, you can certainly be thinking about your own program and how you would go about doing this process based on your individual program and your individual needs. And don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat if you have them, so that we can make sure that your needs are being met as well. Okay, so resource mapping. If we take a look at the crash courses in your original companion guide, but also in this companion guide, they're located on slides 8, 9, and 10. The resource mapping process fits into several different areas of some of the crash courses that we asked you to become familiar with. So in terms of the implementation science crash course, resource mapping is something that exists in that exploration and organization phase. So you might remember from your crash course that the exploration phase is kind of that point where you're asking questions, there's something you're looking to do, there's something you're looking to fix, and you're exploring kind of all of the different options or all of the different ways that you might be able to come at or address that particular thing. And then the next part of the implementation science phase is that organization piece. Now, the actual act of mapping the resources goes directly into that organization box, right? Because that's where we're taking everything that we have available to us and organizing it neatly so that it's a quick reference guide. Like we can open that up and just go straight to this and pull it out, right? And know exactly where it is without having to guess. And it also is a good way to have that organization available to you so that when new people come and go, or someone new comes in, somebody leaves, or whatever the case may be, you don't have to scramble to say, well, is that person trained in this, or does that person have that? Because you would know, right? So like you would know what it is, and if that person wasn't there for the training, they may not have it. So you would have to go and look. So it's just another way to keep like your checks and balances. In terms of human-centered design, resource mapping assists and helps with the ideate phase, which, if you remember from a crash course, is that phase where we generate all of those ideas, right? So that and it kind of connects back to that exploration phase, right? This is where no idea is too big. No idea is too bold or too wild, because you never know when you come up with 5 or 6 bold and wild ideas. And then as you break those down, there are little pieces of each of those that can become a more realistic idea or a more actionable idea, right? So like we would do with our students, we don't want to stifle the creative ideation process or the brainstorming process. Resource mapping also allows us to be more creative in our problem solving. And it's a really important feature of inclusive design, because it's where we can look at who are the children that we are trying to support, and then knowing exactly where to find the resources to make it so that we can inclusively provide inclusive instruction and education for them. Talked about the 3 Ps, which is people, and I should have added planning there. And then it also matches nicely with lesson 4 of the problem solving model, which again, you'll notice is a theme with the human-centered design, pulls us back to that solve and prevent problems piece of the problem solving model. Okay. So when we're talking about resource mapping, there are 6 components of a resource map, or 6 buckets, or 6 file folders, however you want to think about it. And on those 6, it breaks down to people, time, curriculum and instruction, that's one bullet, data, that's going to be like your screeners, your formative assessments, anything that you're collecting information about. Your facilities, right? So that's your grounds, your building, your, like your foyers and your buses and like all those things that would be considered like a facility or a place. And then other available resources, which is very vague, but that's where you would come into things like parent partnerships or community partnerships, or like a Girls on the Run program or a Boys and Girls Club program, or some other thing that comes in as another available resource that you might be able to use to meet the needs of your students, meet the needs of your school community. And so when you're looking at these 6 things, really they correspond to some pretty typical things that we're used to talking about, right? We're used to talking about master scheduling, right? So that might be your time block. We're used to talking about our curriculums and our instruction and how we collect those and apply those and use them with our students. Many of us know about data. Many of us have different visions or ideas about data, but data can come from all kinds of different sources. So observation is data collection, right? When you observe and take notes on a situation, that's data collection. Your screener information and the little reports that it spits out at the end, that's data, right? We can collect data on just about everything, but it's how we organize it and use it that really is where the power of that data is. So we don't want to collect data that we're never going to use, because it's kind of a time waster, but also we want to make sure that we're collecting the correct data to answer the actual question that we have in front of us and not some other broad question. And then of course the facilities, like we talked about, is like the space. It's like your setting, right? So if you're in a story, your facilities is your setting. It's kind of where you're at and how you're using the space that you're in. Okay, so we're gonna do a fun little warm up, and we're already ahead of schedule based on Monday, so we might be doing better today, Nicole. So we're gonna do a fun little warm up, and in this warm up, we're going to make dinner. Okay, we're gonna make dinner. And so what I would like so I'm going to guide us through each of the different bullet points that you see on the screen in front of you. And we're going to go over the rules in just a minute. But the idea here is we're going to look at our kitchen as a facility and look at all of the different resources that are in that facility that we are going to try and incorporate and put together to make dinner, right? To put together a dinner for tonight for your family or for yourself or whoever it is that you're cooking for. Cooking with, cooking for. And what I would encourage as we're doing our brainstorm is be specific, right? So like if we say, you know, what are the ingredients that you have in your house? Don't say a fridge full of food, right? Actually think about what's inside that fridge. Well, I have garlic, I have butter, I have lemon juice, I have, you know, and think about some of the things that are actually in your fridge, right? Because a fridge full of food is so broad. What are you going to solve with that, right? So like really thinking about more of like the individual components that might be inside the fridge. You know, don't just say I have spices. Like see if you can't take a second and write down some of the different spices that you happen to know that you have on hand. And that's the important part of this is you can only use and utilize things that you actually have on hand. So there are some rules to this activity. One, you may not plan to go to the store to get any new materials or ingredients. You can only work with what you have in front of you. Two, you may not go online and get a new recipe. You have to use something that you already have collected, something you either already know how to make or you could go to your recipe box or your recipe book or a magazine that's nearby and make that thing, but you may not go out and get a new recipe. You may not order takeout. You may not just say, well, I'm just going to order takeout because that's kind of like beyond the point of this. And also this is not a buffet. So you must serve the same meal to each person as much as humanly possible without poisoning anyone, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that their meal is going to look exactly the same, but the ingredients should be the same. I'm thinking of my own daughter, or my son rather, like if we were going to have, say, you know, chicken and broccoli Alfredo for dinner, he wants the chicken and the pasta and the sauce and the broccoli all different in like different parts of his plate and not mixed together, right? He's getting the same food, but it's been differentiated for him, right? In a completely different way. Okay, so here we go. Bullet number 1, in that first column, we're going to stop talking for about 90 seconds or so, and you are going to think about all of the resources that you have available to you in your kitchen right now. You are going to think about the people that you have available to make dinner, the time that you have available to make dinner, any resources such as food, ingredients, tools, plates, cutlery, pots, pans, like whatever it is that you've got available to you. Any data that you have. So what do you know about different things that you've made before? You know, like what do people like? What do people not like? What has been a hit? What has been a flop? Those kinds of things. What do you have around you? Like your facility, is it tidy? Is it not? Do we have to clean this over here? Do we have to do that over there? Like, you know, brainstorm from your facility, and then any you know, like recipes or other kinds of outside materials that you might have that you can use to put in your resource list. So we're going to stop talking about 90 seconds and you can jot all those things down in box number 1. Now what you're going to do is think about all the people that you have to feed tonight, right? Or who is it that's going to be eating dinner at your house? Okay, so be sure to jot down any other data that you know about them. So special circumstances, what each person might be able to have, their likes, their dislikes, any allergies that you have to work around. Looking at who is going to be around your table and what information you know about them or have about them. And now here's where we are going to do the matching process, right? So technically what you've done at this point is you have taken and you've created a map of your resources, the things that you have available to you. And you have thought about who it is that you need to serve or who it is that you need to make dinner for or to be able to be welcome at your table when you serve your meal. Now, what I'd like you to do is take another minute and I want you to list 2 lists. So there's 2 lists that you're going to make. The first thing you're going to make is make a list of all of the things that you could make for dinner that would feed those people with only the resources that you have. But I also want you to think about it in the opposite way too. Think about some of the things that you could not make. So like, oh, my family really wants pizza, but I don't have yeast or something like that. And so I can't make pizza. So you're making 2 lists, things that you could make and thinking about it oppositely in the opposite and things that you can't make. So now what we're going to do is just take a minute or 2 to do a quick share out. So if you are brave enough and you want to unmute yourself, you can offer your answer into the room, but you can also use the chat. And so what I would like for you to do is to do some of, and let us know some of the matches that you made, right? So for example, you might say, well, based on what I have in my kitchen, I could make, you know, I could make spaghetti with marinara sauce, but I couldn't make spaghetti and meatballs because I don't have, and then what is it that you don't have? Okay, and so just take a minute and do a matching for us and offer it either in the chat or out loud. Kathy says that she could make chicken stir fry, but not chicken pot pie. What's the ingredient, Kathy, that you don't have to make the stir fry a pot pie?
I didn't put in either a chicken crust I have in my refrigerator or the ingredients. I didn't put that in my list.
Right. Okay. Right. So you don't have that available to you, right, for this particular thing.
Right.
I could make macaroni and cheese, but not macaroni with marinara. Okay, there you go. So, and you don't have any access to that, right? So I'm assuming you don't have any marinara on hand. This person says, I couldn't make tacos because I don't have any shells, but I could make a taco salad. All right, there you go. So that's a great example of serving something that is going to look a little bit different, right? But is something that you could still do and still serve a satisfying meal, right? Based on the resources that you have in front of you. So this person says that they could make pizza with a pre-made dough, but not English muffin pizza. Okay, so that's another one, right? Where we know that we can have pizza and but it has to look like this. It can't look like this, right? So the idea here is that we are looking for how we can take what we have available and then utilize that to meet the needs of the people that we are serving. And in this case, the students that we are serving and the educators that we are serving. So, you know, it's okay to look at the resources that you have and try to reimagine them, like the taco situation, right? Like the pizza situation. So that they look different, but you're still getting to the end, right, of what it is that you were aiming to get to. So good job, great. That was really good.
Okay, so we're going to circle back to that if time allows. But in the meantime, after having that few minutes to sort of think about your resources available to cook dinner, now we're going to shift gears a pinch and talk about the resources that you were able to gather or that you can sort of think of on the spot here and now to serve in a multi-tiered system of support setting, right, in our early childhood classrooms or in our early childhood programs. So we're going to break out into small groups, and these small groups will be random. It's not your home groups like we did last session, so it's a little bit different. There is going to be a little bit of a rule, though, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So I'm going to share this document in the chat box. And when you get to your room, open up that chat box, and it's going to bring you to a new slide deck where you'll pre-populate your group's responses to each of these resources. So the room number that you go to coordinates with your slide number. So room 1 will work on slide 1, room 2 will work on slide 2, etc. And you'll see that there's 2 slides for each of these 5 components of resource mapping. So 2 slides for people, 2 slides for curriculum, data, 2 for time, facilities, etc. So when you get there, take a minute, and you'll probably have about 4, 5, or 6 folks, give or take 1 or 2, in each of your rooms. So allow time for folks to come in. By all means, introduce yourselves. Take a minute if you recognize somebody and you want to say a quick hello and get caught up. We'll allow time for that. But then try and start to generate your ideas on your slide under the appropriate resource. So I'm going to share this link in just a moment. So what we're going to ask you to do is, first things first, we're going to talk to administrators here. So if you are a principal, an assistant principal, a superintendent, director, dean, professor, etc., if your day-to-day work is to provide leadership and oversight in an early childhood setting, then we're going to ask you to pick your room first, completely random. Just pick a room and go to it. I'm just going to allow 10 or 15 seconds for those folks to get caught up there. If you don't have the ability to pick a room, just hang tight and I'll assign you randomly in a minute. But let's let those who have that opportunity make their choice here. The next direction is going to be for all others, or basically our teachers. So if you're a classroom teacher, an ed tech, Title I staff, a behavior specialist, a librarian, etc., if your day-to-day work does involve work with children, then we're going to ask you to pick a room and try not to join a room where you might have an administrator that you know. Try to go somewhere random. I'm going to put that link in the chat room. Okay, so those of you that are left behind, I'm going to start randomly assigning you. So if you see a pop-up, just accept it and off you go.
Back, everyone. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are actually going to go through each of the slides that you created and think about each of the different areas that we would want you to spend some time mapping out when you are implementing, creating, drafting out, revamping, whatever it is that whatever point it is that you are at in your MTSS framework journey. And so what we'll do is hopefully, what we're going to do is we're actually going to have at least a couple of people from each group. It doesn't matter who it is. Just kind of toss out some of the things that were listed in those rooms, and Nicole is going to jot them down for us on the people slide. And then we'll talk a little bit about what you came up with and how you might be able to use it in your resource mapping process. So be careful too. Don't shout them out too loud or too fast because she's trying to type them. So.
And our goal is to spend about 5 to 6 minutes tops on each slide. So yeah, provide that as reference. Okay, so rooms 1 and 2, you had people. Sorry, Andrea. Rooms 1 and 2, you had people. So who did you come up with as resources in your program?
Literacy and math specialists.
Social workers.
Other teachers.
Librarian.
Did you say librarian, Anna? Yes, I can see. Okay, thank you.
Parents in the community.
School nurse.
Title staff.
Other people.
Special ed staff.
Administrators.
Custodians and kitchen. Parents and community.
Yep, grab that one. I'm glad it came up again.
Okay.
Secretaries and nurses.
OTPP staff.
All right, so those are all of the people, or those are that's a sampling of the type of people that are in your buildings, that are on some on a day-to-day basis, some on a half-day basis, some on a weekly basis, depending on, you know, like their role and how much time they spend in that role. But so when we're looking at creating a map of certified people, we also want to think about them in terms of not certified as well. And so what I mean by that is that by truly harnessing the capacity of your human resources that exist in your building, when you are personnel mapping, it's important that you not only look at them at their title and what it is that they have attached to their name, but also other things like their talents, their skills, and any of their interests that they have. And the reason for that is because there's a wealth of knowledge and expertise that exists inside your building, right? And so when you find a need in the student population, you can, if you know that, you know, so-and-so is having a hard time with attendance this year, right? Really having a hard time with attendance, and we've put in an attendance plan and we've tried to address it this way and that way. We've called home, we've done all these things. Well, interviewing that child, for example, might say, well, you know, I just am sad all the time because my soccer team is not playing soccer, you know, this spring, and I just don't like to come to school because I'm sad and I'm not going to come to school. Okay, well, we can talk about the importance of coming to school and things like that, but let's say that this was a 5th grade student and you're in a K-8 school. No, let's do 3rd grade student and you're in a K-3 school. Let's say that there's a 1st grade teacher who has a passion for soccer, right? This person loves soccer, could talk soccer all day long. Wouldn't you want to try to get those two interests together to try to build some momentum for that child to be able to come to school, right? If he knew there was someone at school that would talk soccer with him every time he saw him or her, that child would be like, oh, I want to go see Mr. Jones because he wants to talk soccer with me and I love soccer. I want to go to school because I want to see Mr. Jones, right? And that way you've created a connection to bring that child or to help assist that child with their attendance. So we really want to think about and create a shared understanding of all of the talent that is in your building, because there are expertise areas, there's passion areas and interest areas that can go a long way to helping you solve problems that exist outside of their certification or outside of their title, right? And so personnel mapping is one of those things that can really take you from, well, you know, we don't have this person, but we do have, and then think about who else you have that might be able to help assist in that role. Any questions about people before we move on? Okay, hearing none, why don't we go on to curriculum instruction? Same process. So those folks that were in that room and others, if you have ideas as well, feel free to shout them out. But these can get a little bit complicated. So go a little bit slow so that Nicole can write them down.
All right, I'll go. So we have Haggerty.
Haggerty?
Yep.
Haven't heard of that, Jen.
Oh.
I don't know what that is either.
Community awareness. Phonological. Sorry. Jolly phonics. I have to always say it in my head. We have Jolly phonics too. So I say it backwards.
Yes.
Yes.
That I'm familiar with.
So Jolly phonics.
And I will add it.
And Haggerty is H-E-G-G.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I always mess it up too, Nicole. So
All right.
then
Phonics did not work for me.
It's okay.
I know that Jolly Phonics is 2 words, but my computer is not allowing me to provide a space there at the moment. So keep on keeping on and I'll type.
Okay, so
hopefully it'll catch up.
we have second step in everyday math. Others can help. Lucy Calkins was right out there.
Mm-hmm.
Others will have to jump in. They had a lot.
I don't know why it's not. You guys can hear me typing, right?
Me?
It's not showing up.
I can hear you typing.
Yeah, I'm plugging away, but it's not showing up on my
Yeah,
screen.
that's okay.
No.
That's weird. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do
So
you want
lots of
to try to
specific curriculum.
Yeah, there
Yes,
was
I can
there's
type
a
it
way
in.
more. The group had a pretty good list.
You know what, Nicole, here's what we'll do to move on with this process because your computer's being weird. Why don't we just go to the slides themselves? Can you navigate to the slides themselves?
Yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Oh, you mean over here?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. There you go.
Okay. All right, so the resource mapping for curriculum and instruction, what's interesting here is that it's true that we tend to have a vast amount of curriculum and instruction that is available to us. But how we organize that into a usable framework or a usable library or inventory is equally as important as the big brand name, big, really, really well researched, really, really effective curriculums that you might have on this list. So things like, like for example, Seeing Stars and like the general Linda Mood Bell programming, right? That's not cheap. The training is not cheap. The program is not cheap. And the time that it takes to implement something like that is usually quite extensive. So knowing where they fit inside a curriculum and instruction map for your school can go a long way to making sure that you have access to them and quick access to them when you're looking to get or to solve a problem or to answer a question that you've come up with for a particular student. And so one thing that is recommended when you are resource mapping is to do just like we did, to start with a list of all of the things that you have available to you. And you want to get as deep as, you want to go as deep as possible from curriculums that that you're not using anymore, but you know that you have had in the past. You want to get into instructional practices that maybe one teacher is using and they have a lot of success with that, but two other teachers aren't using that because they don't know about it, right? Because that becomes an instructional resource that could also get matched to your personnel map, because that person could then help support somebody else with that particular intervention or instruction rather. And so we just like when we look at our people, we don't want to just list the high names, right, of each of these programs. The more that we can break it down into usable chunks, the easier it will be to apply in your MTSS when you're creating your multi-layers of systems to support students. So there's not a lot of space on this slide, and I don't know if your other slide deck is working, Nicole, but what I'd like to do is just do a quick sort of the items that you see on your screen, okay? And so what I'd like to do is take a look at these things, and we're going to sort them into tier 1, things that you would use in the tier 1, things that you might reserve for tier 2, and things that you might reserve for tier 3 in terms of curriculum and instruction. And so again, like before, you can just go ahead and shout it out and give time for Nicole to type as well.
So Jolly Phonics is tier 1. Heggerty is tier 1. Second Step is tier 1. I don't know some of these, so Everyday Math is tier 1. The Units of Study, is that Lucy Calkins?
Yes, that's tier 1.
Tier 1, yep.
Illustrative math is tier 1.
Words Their Way is tier 1.
Handwriting Without Tears, I use as tier 1.
Everyday math is tier 1.
Yep, I had that one right here.
Oops, sorry.
Alphabet soup. Sorry, Michelle.
Okay.
Go math is tier 1.
She said go math? Is it go math? I didn't see it.
Or do the math? Do the math is on.
Oh,
That's
do-
the intervention.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, and of these items that we have sorted, even if we didn't sort them all, that's okay. Of these items that we sorted into tier 1, how many of those are your core curriculum?
Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them that we use here are core.
So 5 of those tier 1 interventions you use as your core curriculum.
In our school, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, so what about tier 2? What on the screen would you reserve for an intervention at the tier 2 level?
It's not on the screen, but like Raz Kids.
I think I saw that on the other one.
Yeah, I did too.
It's on here. I
Yeah.
see it.
Lexia,
Oh, it is on
Our
here.
Worlds, do the math. LLI.
Wilson also, zones of regulation.
I'm gonna go down to precept and OES to bring them down.
Social thinking.
Oh, okay.
IXL.
It was supposed to be path blazers.
Oh, path blazers, not math blazers. Oh, okay.
Oops.
Math Tango.
Yeah, and certainly if you know one that is not on this list, it's okay to say it. Like this is not the resource. This is not the same rules as the kitchen activity.
Will you be using some of these curriculums for like I may use it as a tier 1, like zones of regulation I have in my room for all kids. But someone
That's
put
going
it.
to be my next question. That's
Okay.
going to be my next question. Hang on to that.
Okay.
Hang on to that thought.
We also have reading recovery that's not on there,
Is that tier 1 or tier 2?
tier 2.
Okay.
And we will be having math recovery.
All right, and then just in the interest of time, what about tier 3? So what are some of these curriculum and instruction that you would reserve for a tier 3?
Higher. Reading recovery is a tier 3.
I would say math recovery too, and Linda Moon Bell, tier 3.
I missed the last one that you said, Michelle. Oh, Linda Woodbell. I got it.
Linda Moon Bell.
Oh.
Okay. Now, some of the things I heard that I heard come up during this little sort was that somebody would say, well, this is tier 2, and then someone else say, no, that's tier 3, or that we use that in tier 3, or we use that in tier 1, right? And that's okay. There's going to be times when these things are going to flux, and they're going to be sort of on a continuum and can be used in multiple settings. Because that's the beauty of curriculum and curriculum mapping, is being able to look at each of these curriculums and actually asking yourself, do I have to wait until a child needs intensive support to use Raz Kids? Do I have to wait until a child needs a tier 3 intervention to give them Spire or to use parts of the Lindenwood Bell program? Or can I use them earlier as a way to bolster a child's progress or bolster a small group's progress? Because if you look at the list, there's really nothing here that indicates that you must only use that in one setting or at one level of intensity, right? And so thinking creatively around our curriculum and instruction can go a long way to providing layers of support for students in that preventative measure rather than that fail first measure, right? And so it's okay if there are parts of the reading and math recovery that you're like, gee, there's a lot of kids in my class that could benefit from this particular lesson or this particular skill. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce that into my reading, into my reading block, or for the math, math is the same thing. Another interesting thing to think about is and just to kind of to the point of that is in a school that I taught in for several years, we used a Lindenwood Bell, and I was trained as a Lindenwood Bell person, and I was the 7th and 8th grade resource room teacher, and we used Lindenwood Bell in that setting. But there was a 6th grade class in the same building that was really struggling. I mean, only 37% of the students were meeting or exceeding expectations in reading instruction at that level. And it really became obvious that they could use some work on word attack skills, vowel pairs, and some of these other things. And so what we did was we used the Lindenwood Bell curriculum in a whole group setting. And so everybody got a little bit of word attack skills. Everybody got a little bit of vowel pairs and and other kinds of like the flap D and like other kinds of hidden vowels and things like that. And there was nothing to say that you couldn't use that curriculum in that way as long as you were using the curriculum with Fidelity, right? So like if the lesson said to do this, that was how we did it. And we did it with that 6th grade class. And so as the year went on, that 6th grade class really benefited from even just a couple minutes a day of intensified, phonics instruction, because that was the curriculum that we had on hand. And they also made gains in their core reading and their overall reading composite. So when you're thinking about how you use curriculum, it's important to know how each curriculum can also break down so that different parts of it might be used at different tiers, right? Another interesting thing to think about is that some of those tier 1 curriculums are the core curriculum in a particular program or a particular school. And that's not an accident, because tier 1 is actually the universal setting. That's the instructional level. And then we provide intervention at that instructional level based on how the group is doing as a whole. So one thing to think about when you're doing curriculum mapping is not only what you reserve for one thing or another, but also are there ways that you can cross different curriculums over the intensity levels of the tiers. I think we can go on to time. Okay, so time is another big one where, like our personnel mapping, time is one that could be creatively used to meet the needs that exist in our buildings, right? And so taking a look at this slide here, we looked at, so it looks like some people provided blocks of time, right? So the before school block, the during school block, the after school block, right? The breakfast block in the morning. Remote time would be that at home time. That's a little bit separate from what we're talking about here. So I'm going to set that off to the side for just a minute. Specials time and RTI time, MTSS RTI time, team meetings, all of these are individual blocks of time, right? Well, what would happen if we took those larger blocks and instead of thinking of them as labeled blocks of time, if we broke them down into more of a minute structure or a smaller group of minute structure that could be more easily manipulated so that one big block doesn't have to shift all of the other blocks, right, to make everything work and make everything happen. Not sure if you've ever heard it's a metaphor, I guess. And the metaphor is, you know, put your big rocks in first. And the idea is if you have a pile, or if you have a jar and someone gives you, you know, a big old bucket of water and sand and large rocks and medium-sized rocks, and tells you that everything that they've given you has to fit inside that jar. And in order for you to, you know, win your $1 million, everything has to go in. Well, you might look at that and be like, that can't put everything in there. Like that just cannot happen. There's not enough space. There's not enough area. Like I can't do it. Well, if you tried to put in the water and the sand and the pebbles first, and then the big rocks behind it, chances are there's not going to be enough room for those big rocks. And you got to start taking things out and moving it around, and you're shaking the jar and you're trying to find places where those big rocks will fit, right? If you were to put the big rocks in first and then pour the pebbles and the sand and the water in around it, those things are going to infiltrate around the larger blocks, right? And so you can fit more into the jar by putting the big rocks in first. When we think about inclusive design and we think about human-centered design, we have to think about the people that we have in our building, and in this case, the students that we have in our building that we are trying to meet the needs of. And when we look at that core group or that whole group of students, we really have to think about not so much of, well, here's all the time we have in our day, and we're going to block it like this, block, 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 block. Well, that kid needs this. Well, we don't have anybody to do that, or we can't move that because so-and-so wants to teach math at this time, and so-and-so has always taught math at that time, and we just can't move that, and that can't move. Well, maybe it has to, right? Time is one of those things that, like our people, is probably one of the most malleable things that you actually have if you think of it from a different perspective. So thinking of what your big rocks are and setting those up first can go a long way to fitting in the other things around it. Another example that I always laugh at is like Walmart, right? So Walmart is, you know, you go into Walmart to buy your groceries or something, and everything in there is the family size, right? You go in there and it's like the big box of everything. You got the giant box of Cheerios, the giant vat of oil. You've got like everything is big and oversized. Well, because people with large families or people that, you know, buy once a month or once every couple of months are going to go in there and they're going to take their money on their card and they're going to buy the big things. But that doesn't work for everyone, right? For someone like me, I mean, I'm alone in my house half the time, so I don't need the big giant things, right? I just need small portions of things. And so for me, I'm going to take my money and I'm going to go find it, and I'm going to try to stretch it even farther by using it on a wider variety of items that are smaller versus a smaller amount of items that are really, really big, right? And so I have that choice to make in terms of how I want to use my time. What if we were to think about time for your students as a debit card? How many minutes roughly from beginning or before school time when you would expect teachers to be in the building to after school time do you think there are in a day? How many minutes? Just throw it out there. Like it would be what, 7.5 hours if you counted both on both ends. About how many minutes is that? We want to do the math real quick. See if I can find a.
Like 450 minutes.
450 minutes? Okay. So every single child that walks into that building has a bank account with 450 minutes in it. And how they spend that time, how they spend those minutes is going to go a long way to making sure that they have the experience that they need or that they have access to the things that they need. And so, and moving minutes around is generally a lot easier to not disrupt the whole apple cart than it is to try to move large blocks around and not upset the apple cart. Time and scheduling is one of those tricky things that you kind of have to have people that have a passion for logistics and a passion for, you know, like looking at the math around it and like the logistics around it. And so pointing back to our personnel map, you never know, you might have a school secretary that just loves numbers and wants to sit down and help you with your master schedule. Why not? Just because she's not a certified teacher, why can't she help with that schedule if she can help you to re-envision the way that you use your time, right, in your master schedule differently? So when we think about time and how we use it, sometimes we have to take these big blocks and we got to break the labels and break them down into smaller components so that they're more easily manipulated and malleable for your students. Okay, so the data. Now, I don't know some of these items that are on here. So I know last time we had a few that were actually curriculums, and they were not like screeners, universal screeners, or like formative assessment screeners and things like that. So is basically everything on here a data tracker or data source?
From a quick glance, it will certainly provide you data. I'm
Yeah.
looking at things like enrollment numbers, conferences, things like that. And certainly the research-based tools such as DIAL, Teaching Strategies Gold, ESGI, etc.
Okay. I'm curious about the bullet item IEP/504. What kind of data are you collecting from a student's IEP or 504? Somebody wants to just be brave and answer that question.
The IEPs often have goals in them. So you
Okay.
could kind of see where you are measuring towards that goal.
Okay. Yeah. Any other data that an IEP would provide?
Well, it would also indicate it, like it would give you the number of students that that receive special education services or who have 504s.
Okay, so like a population count of the number of students. Okay. Other data that we can get from an IEP.
It would give you, I'm sorry, it could give you the strengths and weaknesses of the child. So the child that you're working with, it would give you an idea of what they're really strong in and what they really might need some more extra help in.
Okay.
And it also, I'm sorry, it also lists out all the evaluation information that made them eligible for an IEP.
Okay, great.
And it has their times on the IEP. So how much time we allot for the reading, or we allot for this.
Okay.
And parent input.
And parent input.
Number one.
We have most important part of it, right?
Are there other screeners on this slide that can also give us data that you can find on the IEP, like parent input data or strengths and weaknesses data, progress data?
What's your question again?
The question is outside of the IEP, are there screeners that are listed on the slide that can also provide the same kinds of data that you get from an IEP? So parent input, strengths and weaknesses, goals, progress, current progress.
Well, everything that you use to get a child to be accepted into special ed comes from observations, assessments from the classroom. So all of that material was provided to get that IP started. So we should have all that data, right?
What about outside of the IEP though? Let's move away from the IEP. Are there screeners on here that can provide us with the similar types of data that an IEP can provide us with?
So the DIAL 4, DIAL 4 should be able to provide some of that information.
What is DIAL 4? Can you fill us in?
Well, I think I'm kind of new to it. So
completely novice, so you got one on me.
Yeah. Someone else might be able to answer that better though.
It's a screen.
Yeah.
I used to use it for Child Find in New Hampshire when I worked there.
But it has 4 parts: a cognitive, oh, sorry, I can't think right now.
Yeah, speech and language, motor.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're on it, Lane. You got it.
Speech.
And it has a parent questionnaire.
Yeah, there you go. It's
And
kind of
is it a screener that you use universally, or is it a screener that you reserve for students that you believe are struggling?
universal.
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 Okay.
I see where you're going with this. Yes.
You caught me. So my point here is that we don't always have to wait for an IEP or a 504 to get some of the information that we get on an IEP or a 504. But here's the thing, sometimes we do wait. Sometimes we wait so long without thinking about all of the different ways that we could gather this data to make universal goals for groups of kids and things that we need for like the population of kids. And we just wait because we covet those things as, well, we only do that when this kid is experiencing this over the course of time, or we only use that if. So when you're looking at how you're screening, I mean, the IEP is actually a great example of, well, you know, we've got parent, we've got present levels, we've got, you know, observation data, we've got all these things. But what would stop you from using those data at the non-IEP level, right? In order to build a program around the students that you have in front of you, right? And so the way that we collect our data and the way that we use our data can go a long way to helping us to create a multi-tiered system that can support a multiple of students sooner, right? Before they get to the point where we have to be recommending them and getting them accepted into a special education program of some kind. So like before, I do just want to take a minute and taking a look at the screeners that are on the screen, the screeners that are on the screen. We're going to sort them into something that you would use at tier 1, things that you would use at tier 2, and things that you would use and reserve for tier 3. And if there are things not on the screen that you know of and just didn't get listed here during the few minutes that the group had, feel free to toss those out into the room as well.
Hey, Brigance.
Ames Web.
Noia.
DAR testing.
Teaching strategies, gold, and home visits.
ESGI and observations. Attendance.
I see Swiss on there too. It's kind of hiding the behavior tracking. Sometimes people, that's a program Swiss, but ODRs, yeah, office referrals, yeah.
Parent teacher conferences.
PALS.
Work samples.
Behavior screeners like the SRSS and SIBSS.
Okay, even if we didn't get them all, let's move on to tier 2. So what are some of the things on the screen here that you would reserve for a tier 2 screener?
RTI.
We use Ames Web as tier 2. Your FBA charts or ABC charts.
I sort of feel like it's just going to repeat. like almost everything would go into both tiers.
Oh, that's an interesting point to make though, right? Because what if you're trying to use the same screener in the same way to identify a different tier? Are you know what I'm saying? So like one of the reasons why we look at resource mapping and we really try to look at what are the true universal screeners that we're going to use in that universal tier 1 versus the things that we would reserve for a more intensified screener when the universal setting is not working or when the intervention at the tier 1 is not working. What are the ones that we would say, look, we need more information about this particular piece or this particular part to determine if this child or this group of students needs more time or more instruction in that area. So that's a very good point to make, that we have to know and pre-plan for how the screeners in our programs are utilized to collect that data for us so that we can match that data correctly to the problem that we're trying to solve. So instead of having all the data in one bucket, right, and have it all just sit in there one bucket and be like, well, I picture like a toy box, right? And like, when you're looking for that one thing that you're looking for and you're in it and you're like peeling around, or like the crayons, because you're looking for the peach crayon and you're looking and you can't find it. And you can hear like all the other crayons, like move them. We're not just looking for screeners that might give us information. We're looking for screeners that match for the information, right, that we're looking for. So how we apply those screeners to the need that we've identified is very important, right? And some of them aren't going to be used until like a tier 3, and some of them that we would wait to use for a tier 3 intensity or even a special education referral might have been available at a lower level if it would have helped give you some information on things that you need. Because there's nothing in the rule book that says that you couldn't do an FBA in tier 1. There's nobody at the State Department of Maine or the federal department or the curricular writers. No one's going to come to you and said, I said not to do that. Don't do that. Don't do FBA in tier 1. Because that would be silly. If the child needs an FBA, we do the FBA. It can happen at any point in time, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, right? There's no rule that you can't use it sooner to prevent failure instead of waiting until that child is failing and failing and failing. And now we're trying to respond to that failure, right? Another question that I have for the group to think about is, folks listed RTI as a tier 2 screener. Does someone want to explain how they're using RTI as a tier 2 screener? Oh, Nicole actually asked that. I didn't even see that, Nicole.
Didn't see what?
It's a different Nicole.
Different Nicole. Nicole K.
Oh.
I would never, ever attempt your name.
It's phonetic, actually.
Okay.
So that Nicole and me have the same first name, same middle name, and the same birthday.
That's right. I forgot we have the same birthday too.
Yeah.
How are you?
Wow. Okay. Wow. All right. But I'm curious as to how that's being used, and maybe it just got listed out in a brainstorm and it didn't really belong there to begin with, and that's okay too. Like I'm just really curious as to if someone was truly feeling like they were using an RTI at a tier 2 as a tier 2 screener. I would be really curious about what that would look like so that I could understand it a little bit better. Because RTI being response to intervention is that data that we get out no matter what level of the tier that we're in, right? So how students are responding on universal screeners, how students are responding on individual screeners, how students are responding to interventions and intensified instruction and things like that. Because if you spell it out, response to intervention, if you have provided some kind of intervention, what we're looking for is the response to that intervention. But there's other data that you can get out of RTI data. Students' response to the intervention, but then what else?
So I'm going to say progress monitoring. I mean, even if it's not in Ames Web, which we do some progress monitoring in, but we set up progress monitoring just as a part of the intervention to keep track of the data of how kids are doing. Does that make sense?
So that's a collection tool. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But that's not a specific program.
And the data, the collection process itself is different to what the data tells you. So the collection process is different than what you're actually looking for. But there's something else that RTI, or response to intervention data, can give us. Anybody want to? So it's how the student is responding to intervention instruction. What else does it give us?
I just kind of thought with a small group setting or an individual setting that RTI has, that you would get that observational. Sometimes I have found things that I didn't really understand that were missing.
Okay. What else?
Okay, I'm going to bite something else here. Then I'm going to shut myself off.
No.
All right, so when we do RTI, we set up the intervention. We have a timed amount of time that we use the intervention. And if the intervention is failing, we change the intervention. Am I getting close?
Well, you've explained a process called RTI that people use as RTI, right? And you're looking at
the collection. Yeah, I'm just going to listen now.
we're still in the student
taught.
Yeah, we're still in the student realm. We're looking at whether the child or the student is responding to what we're doing, but what else can it give us? There's one more thing, at least one more thing.
It tells what works for the student.
Okay, it can tell us what works for the student, but it also tells us about the instruction.
Yeah.
It tells us about the instruction, and it tells us about the interventionist, right? Just because a student is not progressing does not mean that the intervention was doomed to fail or didn't work for that kid. There are other questions that we also need to ask when it comes to that process. Fidelity of the implementation, capacity of the interventionist, even the buy-in and social and emotional status of the interventionist. These are all things that we have to look at before we can add on more intense instruction and more time away in pullout and more time away in testing for a student. When we have to look in an MTSS, we also look at the fidelity of the intervention itself and the fidelity of the instruction itself. And so you have to have in an MTSS, which is broader and includes the process of response to intervention, or it includes analyzing student response to intervention. You have to also look at the environmental factors, the curricular factors, and the instructional factors. Okay. So the response to intervention can also tell us other things, but you have to know to ask for them, right? You have to know to say, oh, hey, maybe was the teacher out a lot that week, or was the interventionist pulled to do other things and it didn't happen, right? There's all kinds of data that we can get from that type of situation. Okay.
About 3 minutes, Andrea, to do facilities, and then I'll move back to the PowerPoint too.
3 minutes.
I know.
Okay. Oh, and there's a question in there that I won't address right now. Okay, so facilities. Okay. I did ask you to bring to gather 2 maps for today's resource mapping. And we're not going to use them in depth at this point. I think at one point I thought we would, but we're not. But the idea with the resource mapping and the facilities mapping is I look at this #1 bullet on this slide that's right here, and it says space is always an issue. And then let's see. If you go to the other slide, Nicole, the other facility slide, there was one I saw on there. Nope. Okay, go back. There was something. Here we go. Space allocation is not as supportive as the needs that exist consistently. Now that is really important, right? Because how many people grow attached to their classrooms? How many people grow attached to different parts of the building or different places that the window faces and things like that? This is a huge issue with the way that we're utilizing our facilities. And you can also apply the big rocks analogy to this as well. So when you're looking at that blank map of your school and you're looking at how, or your program or your daycare center or your preschool center, and you're looking at how you can utilize that facility in a way that meets needs more efficiently and effectively of the people you're trying to serve, which is our students, you have to think about where you're going to put the big rocks first, right? Because the other ones will filter in and gather around them. And so, I mean, we could go through and do a little bit more in depth here, but I think that really that's the big takeaway, right? Is that it says right there, bullet 1, and I think bullet 2, 3, 4, 5, 4. Yeah, bullet 1 and bullet 4 are pretty pervasive across facilities when it comes to school buildings. And that is many people, or at least decision makers, administrators, decision makers, school level teams, things like that, tend to believe that the space is not being used as effectively as it could be, but then they struggle to work through that when you've got like a really strong force somewhere else that doesn't want to move their classroom or doesn't want to move to this space or that space or this space over here or whatever. And so space is another one of those things like time and that we can maximize, but you have to erase it to kind of think about it from a completely different perspective. And again, that rocks analogy is a great way to start thinking about. So like if you were going to redesign your facility to meet the needs of the students, to allocate the space more equitably to meet those needs, what are the big rocks? Where do they go? And then can you build everything else out around it by aiming for those big rocks first?
And I would just add that I think the same would be true in boiling it down to your classroom space. So if you're an educator in a classroom and you're thinking of how your facility, meaning your classroom with a whole group space, maybe it has a sink, maybe it has a restroom available, maybe it has an exit door, and thinking of that space as a blank slate and how to better accommodate all your students. So if you're finding that your whole group time, there's a couple of students who regularly leave that space, or a couple of students who can't seem to settle and are fidgety, especially in the beginning of the school year, maybe that's a clue that you need more space to house whole group, right? So what you thought was going to work well because of a corner or a window or furniture, etc., truly isn't, then it might be time to sort of revamp what that facility is telling you.
Absolutely, yeah. We, if you think about it, we do that even in our own homes, right? How many of you would move into a living room and wait to put the couch in last? Probably not many, right? Unless you had like ultimate amounts of space available to you and it did not matter where the couch went. And so one of those things to think about is, you put the big things in and you make that work, and then you structure everything else, around it. So a room as considered a facility is also adequate and is relevant to that as well. Because sometimes we want to make it look really nice, but it's not as functional or effective as it could be.
Right.
So we got to shake that up a little bit.
Right. Okay, we're going to pull this together. Whoops.
Nicole, if you want to advance to the next slide really quick first. Nope, next slide. There we go. Oh, there's another one. We don't have that slide. It's in the companion guide. Okay, so in your companion guide on slide 15, there's a putting it together slide that somehow I don't seem to see on the oh yeah, there we go, school/program profile. In your companion guide, there is actually a link that you can follow, and it goes out to a place called swiftschools.org. And Swift Schools is like a private multi-tiered systems of support consultant firm, you know, or something like that. And the link that takes you to is something called a student/program profile. And once you have taken a look and taken and organized all of your resources, the next thing that you have to organize and put some and quantify is your student and your school body profile, right? And so that is the piece that you would do next. So here are all the things that I have available to me. And then here are the students and the people that I need to serve, because that becomes the second part of that matching, right? Where we can look at where our needs are and then know in our library where we would go to get those things, right? And so we organize our resources first, take an inventory, and then see who's coming, and then say, okay, well, this is what I have. Is there something that I still need that I cannot creatively create with what I have? Or do I have something that I've used in the past that I don't have anymore? And who are the people that I'm trying to serve, and how can I match what I have to what they need? And then asking if you have to go out and get other things, because there are times where you're going to be like, I really need this other thing and I can't do it otherwise. Or somebody new will come in with a new need or a new something that you didn't have before. So that will always happen. So that's what that link takes you out to, because that would be part 2 of a resource mapping process. A least restrictive form. I'm not sure what you mean by least restrictive form. Does it say school data profile at the top of the page? Oh yeah, so scroll down. Yeah, so when you do a school data profile, when you do a school and program profile, you profile everyone that is part of that community. So students that you have placed somewhere else are actually part of your school profile. Students that are in district but somewhere else are part of your school and program profile. Those students are still part of that profile. If you go down, it then opens up into things like students in your community that are homeschooled, students that are in general education classes, and then there's also like the there's an academic performance section, and I believe there's a behavior section as well. So this would be a school profile tool that you could use to quantify and get a look at how and where your students are placed in terms of where they are out in the world and how that relates to the resources that you're using to match with them. Thank you for clearing that up, because I would see that too and say, oh, I didn't want that. And if I was looking at academic data. So thank you. Okay, now we can squeeze this in, can't we, Nicole?
We can. Got about 6 minutes.
Can. Okay. So surprise. Remember the kitchen dinner or the dinner that you made at the beginning of the session today? Well, some of your kids are coming over for dinner. Some of your students are coming over for dinner, and you have to prepare a meal for them using the same rules and parameters that you had before. So you may not go to the store to get any materials or ingredients. You may not go online to get a new recipe. You may not order takeout, and you must, to the best extent possible, serve the same meal, whether it looked like, and remember my my story about my son, right? Whether it looks the same on the plate or not, it can be differentiated, but everybody should be getting the same meal as humanly possible. But before you all decide that you're just going to make chicken nuggets and fries, we do have a couple of the students, actually none of the students like onions. Okay, well, that's all right. 3 of the kids don't eat chicken. For whatever reason, they just don't eat chicken. That's not in their wheelhouse. And you got 1 kid that does not eat cheese. They do not eat cheese. So on your companion guide page, I think it's slide 12. I'm not sure which slide it is. I lost track. No, slide 16. So on page 16 in your companion guide, we are going to go through this process, and we are going to, so the in my kitchen is already done, and but now who are you feeding? So we've given you the who are you feeding. you're feeding a group of people that don't like onions, some that don't eat chicken, and some that do not eat cheese. And now you're going to make a list of what are the things that you have available to you in your list, what can you make for your kids, and also list some of the things that you cannot make for them. Okay. And we left out things like allergies because I didn't want to make it completely impossible for you. But you want to also serve a whole meal if possible. So protein, starch, fats, fruits, veggies, everything, like as best as you can, a balanced meal to your students. Nice.
Well, I can't make my Asian noodles and chicken, but I can make stir-fried rice and make them smoothies.
Ooh,
there you go.
Great idea.
So I couldn't do pork chops and broccoli anymore, but I can still do the broccoli. It's my kid's favorite vegetable at school. And I can have pasta with marinara sauce on the side.
There you go.
Andrea, I chose peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
I love that.
Some just jelly, some just peanut butter.
Some half sandwich, some whole sandwich.
Yeah. Milk.
Some triangles, some squares. Yeah.
Carrot sticks and some celery sticks.
And you have all of those things in your home right now?
I do.
Perfect.
Wow.
Who doesn't have peanut butter and jelly and bread?
Well, I'm worried about the celery sticks though. Do you actually have celery in your house?
I have celery and I have carrot.
Yeah. So for me, celery is one of those things where if it pops up on a recipe, I have to make a special trip to the store to get it. It doesn't. My mom, she has tomato every week. I know I wouldn't buy a tomato every week. We're not gonna eat it, but all right, that's a good one. Peanut butter and jelly. What else?
I'm still making pizza, but a quarter of it won't have cheese on it. Or I can cut the dough into fourths and each kid can make their own or something different.
Okay.
Breakfast for dinner. I love that. That's a great idea. Good. So hopefully the connection is sort of not lost in this activity where we took a big idea of gathering resources, seeing what's available to you in this place and time, and making something of it, right? So whether or not you knew it existed prior to thinking about it, or you had to go double check your fridge or double check your spice pantry, that's what it sort of takes in gathering your resources and knowing what's available to you. I know in another example from Monday, some folks were saying, when we were talking about what people you have today to feed, and a response was their spouse. And luckily they were saying, my spouse is a good cook, so he'll figure it out. That's exactly a resource, right? For your people in your locations. Well, I'm not good with data. Luckily, my secretary loves numbers. I'm going to her, right? So that's sort of the bigger picture connection here between planning your dinner with what you got, no time to go to the store, and serving the children in your classroom with the resources and the things that they need to be successful and better contributors in your classroom.
Yeah, and Nicole, just to build on the secretary's example that you just gave, we tend to, I could hear in my head when you said, well, I don't like numbers, but my secretary does, so I'm going to go to her. I instantly heard, I don't have time to do that because I have to stuff these envelopes to get them ready for the auction that's coming up next week. Is there someone else in your building that could stuff envelopes so that you could put the scheduling expert on your scheduling team, right? So again, thinking about the people you have, the interest and expertise that you have, the time that you have, and can you reorganize them? Don't treat her, just because she's a secretary in this example, to block her into that and waste that opportunity to get her logical brain is a shame. I mean, you don't have to, nobody's going to tell you to do it, but it would just be a shame, I think, for me personally. So yes, making something of what you have before you go out and get something else. Okay,